The week my sister took over as CEO, she fired me, claimed that I was too sentimental for the new course. She was unaware that I was listed on half of the company's contracts. Welcome to Family and Story, everyone. If something in this tale resonates with you, would you kindly consider subscribing, give it a like, and share your opinions with us in the comments section below. Stories like this reach more people in need thanks to your support. It's said that you should believe someone when they reveal themselves to you. However, what would you do if it were your own sister? I'm Vivian Greene, the eldest daughter in a family that prioritized appearance over moral character. The soft-spoken but shrewd mother who transformed Greene and Daughters from a side gig into a reputable brand in East Coast interior design. My mother, Clara, was the lifeblood of our home. She used light, warmth, and care to build homes just as she did people. She passed away when I was 13. Then a chill descended upon the Greene residence. Harold, my father, was a traditional and well-to-do guy who lost himself in his profession. He made himself the family's and the company's gatekeeper, and I just kind of drifted away. I used to assist my mother with decorating the rooms, and I liked the wallpaper. When Mom died, Madeline, my younger sister, was just 6 years old. Unlike me, she was raised in a different Greene family, where everything revolved around her. She was sharp-tongued, golden-haired, and loud enough to fill the void left by Mom. For that, my father loved her. And me, I became trustworthy. I stayed in Connecticut and showed up to work every day, gradually reviving Mom's idea, one room, one client, and one silent triumph at a time, while Madeline danced at prep school galas and shared pictures from Saint-Tropez. Nobody ever expressed gratitude. But even if no one applauds, I believed that was what legacy meant. For many years, a picture was displayed in the conference room at Greene and Daughters. My mother and I were giggling while painting a gentle sage on the dining room wall, our elbows covered in plaster. There was no image of Madeline. Getting messy was something she detested. I guess that's where the long, invisible separation started. I was referred to as the Foundation by the Greene and Daughters personnel who turned to me when clients were anxious or deadlines slipped. I resolved vendor conflicts and completed late-night redesigns after a customer's husband abruptly changed his mind regarding marble countertops. My dad hardly took notice. However, I didn't mind that, because I thought that one day I would own the business and fulfill my mother's unfulfilled dream of creating a community design fund to provide dignity and beauty to families who would never be able to pay for our services. I persevered because of that ambition. I led a modest life. The car I drove was 10 years old. I never went on vacation. I put all of my money back into the company. It wasn't glitzy, but it was truthful. It was also mine, or so I believed, until my father's retirement day. Not a warning, no conversation. With the same calm demeanor he had always exhibited, he simply stepped into the boardroom and remarked, "We need fresh leadership now. Madeline will assume the role of CEO." Like I normally did, I gave a courteous grin. I even got up to cheer. However, that day something shattered behind my ribcage. I didn't lose the championship, though. However, my father made the statement without even glancing at me. He never once mentioned my name. Madeline had recently returned from London with a new MBA, a stylish black outfit, and a bunch of jargon that made it appear as though someone else had entered our family's psyche and changed the design language. After that, still smelling like Chanel and ambition, she gave me a hug and remarked, "Viv, don't worry. I'll see to it that you remain where you belong." I assumed she meant it with kindness at the time. Only someone like me would notice the changes that took place in the office in the weeks that followed. Overnight, the fern in the corner that I had resurrected from yellowed leaves vanished. We lost our comfortable reading nook in the waiting room. Cold glass tables, gray accent chairs, and gold-framed corporate language on the walls have taken their place. Madeline tossed her coat to our receptionist as if it were an afterthought and remarked, "We need to modernize." With her AirPods still in, she walked into meetings 10 minutes late, waving her hand as though her mere presence would advance initiatives. And it did somehow. The board fell in love. Her vitality was adored by her clients. Even longtime workers who formerly approached me in private confidence now adored her as if she were a return to royalty. And me, I faded into the background. Before the sun came up, I was still there, going over purchase orders and examining paint samples in the daylight. I still dealt with inventory issues and calmed the nervous bride, who had 3 different color changes for the draperies. But I wasn't the foundation anymore. I was Madeline's sister Vivian. Madeline hired experts. One of them said to me, "Your designs are beautiful, but they don't scale." I recall thinking, what the hell does that mean? In 4 years, the company had expanded 37% under my direction. We made it through the housing crash. Throughout the pandemic, we retained every employee. We did more than simply scale. We persevered. However, I was urged to keep notes throughout meetings. Madeline grinned, sat back and added, "I presented a proposal for our pro bono outreach program, the one my mother dreamed of. When we're not concentrating on revenue-building priorities, let's go back to that." I gave a nod. This was a skill I had mastered, to hold off, swallowing, to smile as a silent creature inside of you gradually gets smaller. One day stands out in my memory. An elderly couple remodeling their retirement house with whom I had been working for 6 months came in with pastries to express gratitude to the designer who saved their marriage. On my behalf, Madeline received them. She said, "Vivian excels at handling emotional situations." That was the end of it. Emotional matters. As though she just saw design as a series of antiseptic lines displayed on a screen. I began to feel as though I was a ghost in my own building. The board's endorsement of Madeline, however, was not the most painful thing. It wasn't even the destruction of the areas I had painstakingly designed over the years. My father's gaze on her was the cause, as if she had done something courageous, as if she had merited something that no one else could own, as if he'd at last gotten his desired heir. Of course, he never stated it. He was not required to. I had seen him give Madeline that look all her life, so I knew what it was. When did she place 3rd in a competition to ride a horse? He got her a bracelet made of diamonds. When during a dry quarter did I subtly bring in our biggest client contract, he sent the email to the finance department. No response. I gave up trying to win him over. I simply completed the task. The silently vital, invisible, and unappreciated effort. Until the day Madeline entered my office, which I had previously shared with my mother, and spoke the words, "We're reorganizing. We require fresh vitality. I've made the decision to release you." As simple as that. Not a warning. No severance. Just her signature at the bottom of a printed letter. I refrained from crying. I remained silent. My mother's ruler, the conference room portrait, and the 1 potted plant I kept by the window were among the items I packed. I then departed. I was not stopped. It was a calm drive home. It was a Tuesday. Late autumn. On a day just before the last leaves fall, the trees appear to be holding their breath. The sun was low, and I recall it brushing building tops as if to bid them farewell. It took me a while to return home. My mother used to drive us to the lake on Sundays, and I parked there. With her sketch pad open in her lap, we would eat sticky lemon cookies from the local bakery while seated on the wooden bench. She would sketch areas that were not yet present, such as bright nurseries, kitchens, and courtyards. She would frequently say, "Vivian design is simply love manifested. That's all it is." It had been years since I had been there. I stayed until the water darkened and the sky turned to smoke that afternoon. I refrained from crying. Not at all. I simply existed, as if I had nowhere else to go, the sole employee from my mother's era still working at Greene & Daughters. Clara, the receptionist, called me the following morning. Her voice faltered. "I was unaware," she muttered. Nobody did. During the Monday meeting, she abruptly made the announcement that you had made the decision to move on. I gave her my gratitude. "It's okay," I assured her. However, it wasn't. Word got out more quickly than I thought. I began receiving private texts from clients. A few were upset. Some people were perplexed. Some remarked that without me, they couldn't finish their projects. I said the same thing to every one of them. "The business will look after you. Don't be concerned about me." I meant it. I didn't have any plans. No retaliation. No grand plan. All I wanted to do was go away for a bit and heal myself quietly. However, life has a way of folding the pages you believed to be complete. A woman named Isabelle Moreau called me 2 weeks after I was dismissed. Softly, with that sophisticated Parisian accent, she presented herself as a design investor from Marseille. She remarked, "Last year I saw your work in a hospitality portfolio. Your upstate New York hotel." The light and warmth stayed with me. I was too exhausted to accept flattery. She wasn't calling to give me praise, though. Here, I'm constructing something. A group of designers who prioritize meaning over stats. We provide freedom and equity. Last week, your name was mentioned once more, and I decided to get in touch. I nearly declined. By then, I was terrified of everything. I was afraid that I wasn't good enough by myself, fearful of suffering harm once more, fearful of what it might cost to start afresh. However, there was a note of my mother in her voice. I replied, "Yes." Silently, with hesitation. However, absolutely. I kept it a secret. Not even Clara. I started writing late into the night while working from my tiny apartment and sipping tea from the broken mug my mother used to use in the studio. At first, designs arrived slowly, like unwelcome visitors. Then, however, they arrived. Warm hues, walls with texture, doors with arches, areas designed for relaxation and laughter. Areas where people felt noticed. I gave it the name Mira House. Look-see is what it means. Just a friendly reminder. A start. By the spring, I had enough money to properly register the business 5 foreign clients and a small group of independent contractors who shared my vision. I never gave Greene and Daughters another glance. However, they gave me a glance. Silently, then not so silently. Just as I was thriving, everything began to unravel from their perspective. A story about Mira House's mission was published by Design Within Light, a magazine I used to respect. My designs started to circulate among charitable housing organizations, architecture forums, and even school remodeling circles after I was dubbed one to watch. Then the phone calls began, not from unidentified individuals, but from folks I used to know. One by one, former customers of Greene and Daughters contacted them because they missed something they couldn't identify, not because they were angry or even sympathetic. The sensation was lost on them. The love was missed. I didn't initially respond to the majority of them. I was at a loss for words. Others were courteous, inquisitive, and remorseful in that evasive, business-like manner that people use to avoid acknowledging that they saw you fall and remained silent. But then, I received a message from Mrs. Halberg, a client I knew well. She had requested that her retirement home be redesigned, as did her husband. According to her, they had desired sunshine in the walls. I had been with her for months, assisting her in selecting Vermont-made tile and gentle yellows. She didn't say much. We canceled our last installation with Greene and Daughters. It no longer felt like you. Vivian, I hope you're still designing. You added a soul to our house. I spent a lot of time thinking about that message. I then started cautiously responding to the others. A well-known nonprofit organization that constructs transitional housing for women and children in recovery from domestic abuse sent me an email a few days later. They had seen the Mira House website, which was hosted on a free domain, and was, to be honest, still in draft form. They said, "We're submitting a fresh grant application. We will require a lead designer if we win. Would you be willing to talk? Your name was suggested." Before I could convince myself otherwise, I said sure. The discussion evolved into a suggestion. The idea evolved into a collaboration. The collaboration turned into a movement. We constructed sanctuaries rather than merely designing spaces. Locations where people could recover. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to persuade anyone that my job was important. It simply did. I can very clearly recall the day my name appeared in Architectural Digest. Wearing one of my mother's old sweaters, I was enjoying a cup of coffee at my kitchen table with my hair still damp from the shower. The headline said, "How Vivian Greene is Reimagining Purpose in Interior Design from Silence to Substance." When I saw it, I burst into laughter. It felt like something out of someone else's life, not because I found it hilarious. My mother came to mind. What she would have said. Most likely nothing. Simply her gentle grin. A nod, perhaps. A hand on mine, perhaps. The article circulated, and it eventually returned to Greene and Daughters. I had no idea how dire things were over there. Not until I received another call from Clara, this time from a different number. She sounded worn out, worn thin. The new investors withdrew Vivian. 3 of the well-known customers have already departed. Additionally, Madeline is working to rebrand the entire business. Nobody is on board. The employees are dispersed. It no longer feels like us. I remained silent. What could be said? My administrative assistant, a young designer I had mentored from community college, forwarded an email to me a week later. Tasha is her name, and she has a heart as bright as the sun. The email had arrived via the general inquiry form at Mira House. Madeline sent it. Her title had not been utilized. No signature. No logos. It was just her name in plain English. "I'm submitting an application for the Design Justice Grant. According to what I've read, Mira House is now a reviewing partner. I'm hoping Vivian will take a look at the Greene and Daughters application if she sees this. I am aware that we haven't spoken. However, I support the mission. I read it 3 times, but then again, I didn't respond. Not quite yet. However, I consented to attend the final evaluation by the grant panel. A repurposed community hall on the outskirts of town served as the venue, complete with coffee urns and folding chairs, as well as posters advertising gardening classes and after-school tutoring. I was dressed simply, a blazer made of pale linen, my mom's vintage necklace. When I entered, there was no fuss, aside from Madeline. When she noticed me standing behind the podium discreetly consulting with the other panelists, she froze. I could feel the stress in her fingers as they gripped her portfolio, but her face remained the same. My name was not mentioned by her. I didn't mention hers. Rather, I turned to the final page of her plan, went over the line items of the budget, and read what she had written in her concluding paragraph. "Love made visible is design." That was my mother's saying. I had overlooked that. Now I'm attempting to recall it. My hands remained steady. I didn't break my voice. I just laid the paper lightly on the table, folded it once, and relaxed back in my chair. The sky was just starting to turn pink at the edges when I left the community hall that day, as though the earth had stopped to let out a breath. I didn't hold off till the choices were made. To be honest, I didn't want to spend too much time in the same room as all that history, and I knew the other panelists would deliberate fairly. Marigolds had been planted along the curb outside, little gold bursts of brightness against the faded concrete. For a while, I just stood there inhaling and letting the air settle around me while keeping my hands in my pockets. Madeline never made an effort to talk to me. Not prior to the presentation, not after. She noticed me. Additionally, she didn't perform for the first time in our lives. She didn't grin or give an explanation. She simply cast her gaze downward. There was no drama. Don't yell. Don't apologize. Just be quiet. And during that quiet, I felt softer. Not pardoning. Not quite yet. But another thing. A release of sorts. I had stopped waiting for anything. Not for my father, not for her, not even for the recognition I once so desperately needed. I already entered a life that didn't require it. The weeks that followed went by in silence. Mira House kept expanding. We completed a project for a Baltimore women's shelter, another in a tiny Colorado mountain town. I began coaching young designers who were like me in the past, bright-eyed and full of ideas but too shy to speak up. I would occasionally find myself drawing late at night with one hand wrapped around a tea mug when I heard my mother's voice in the background. "My dear, it doesn't have to be elaborate. All it needs to do is feel like home." I got a little package in the mail one afternoon. No address for return. I instantly recognized my name scrawled in ink. There was a folder within, cream in tone and emblazoned with the vintage Greene and Daughters emblem. A letter, too. It wasn't long. 4 lines at most. "Vivian, while organizing the old design archives, I came across this. I believe that was intended for you. I apologize for taking so long." I opened the folder. There was a piece of paper inside, mushy at the edges and slightly yellowed from age. It was an old sketch of my mother's. A sunroom, large windows, bench with cushions. In the corners are hanging ferns. A table whose edges are chipped. 2 teacups, too. In her slanted style, she had scribbled at the bottom, "For Vivian." You don't need permission to show your light. I just sat there motionless. I refrained from crying. I remained silent. I allowed myself to feel the weight of that paper, though, for all the years of being ignored, the silent hours, the constant work, and the hands that constructed without recognition. I clutched it like a heartbeat. I owned them. They had been all along. I brewed tea later that night. I made use of the fine porcelain. I lit a candle. The pleasant murmur of jazz filled the room as I switched on the tiny radio in the kitchen. As the day grew darker, I sat by the window with that sketch next to me. I owed nothing to the world, but it had provided for all of my needs somehow. Not in cheers, but in tranquility, and I now think that's the real definition of success. I happened to be by the former Greene and Daughters building a few days later. My feet just happened to drift naturally on a Saturday morning after the farmer's market, not on purpose. Perhaps it was simply the memories stuck to the sidewalk, but the bag of apples felt heavier than normal in my grasp. The gold letters had faded, but the sign remained in place. Once decorated with seasonal flowers, the front windows were now empty. In the showcase area, I saw one chair askew. It was one of mine. Back when I still believed I would spend my later years in that office, I had designed that sculpture. I stood for a time on the other side of the street. No one gave me a second glance as they went by. As I watched her go by through the glass, I guess I appeared to be just another woman taking a walk. I was shocked when the door opened. Madeline went outside. No heels, no power suit. Her long cardigan dropped off her shoulders like she hadn't slept properly in weeks, and she was wearing only flats. She had a paper coffee cup in both hands, as though she were protecting herself from the cold, and her hair was twisted back in a loose knot. She noticed me. Her eyes softened after widening. I remained motionless. She gave the slightest nod after hesitating on the stoop. "It's not an invitation, not a request, just a little recognition." I returned the nod. That was all. Nothing to say. No justifications. I continued to walk while she turned and went back inside. The apple bag was dangling softly beside me. The grant committee made its selections public in the ensuing weeks. The collaboration projects of Mira House were accepted. It wasn't Green and Daughters. I refrained from boasting. I didn't even feel like I had won. It was instinctive, as if something has just gone back to its proper place. Just to check in, Clara gave another call. She remarked, "We still talk about you here." Occasionally, someone mentions a fabric you selected or a color scheme you insisted on. The ones that gave them a sense of security. That made me smile. Really, that was all I had ever desired. Not credit or legacy, simply the opportunity to create things that made others feel better. The new interns brought new sketches to our morning meetings at Mira House. One of them, a young man with a hesitant smile and fingers covered with ink, asked me whether I ever lost the will to start afresh. I was honest with him. The nicest thing is starting over. It implies that you are free to create something sincere, something that only you could dream of. As if it meant something, he wrote that down. Perhaps it did. I occasionally saw brief quotes of Madeline in business stories and on panels at regional gatherings. Her expression had shifted, not as well polished, more authentic. I wanted to know how she was doing. I didn't make contact, and neither did she. I believe that certain things are not intended to be fixed. I just remembered slowly, distantly. I got a big envelope in the mail one afternoon. A formal certificate signed and embossed by the Design Justice Alliance was enclosed. The first ever human-centered innovation honor had gone to Mira House. A message was attached, written by hand. "Thank you, Vivian Greene, for creating warmth where others erected barriers." I had it pinned over my desk. Not because I was in need of the compliment, but because it brought to memory something I had nearly forgotten throughout the years of being silent, trustworthy, and unnoticeable. That I was valuable. Value is not loud, not branded or gaudy, but a steady, silent value. The kind that remains intact after being fired. The type that remains when your name is omitted from a meeting. The kind that remains even during the winter, growing still like roots beneath the surface. I closed the office early that evening. Without an umbrella and with only my coat collar up, I made my way home in the light rain. The puddles stretched like paint reflecting the city lights, and I felt light for the first time in a long time. Not victorious, not proven right, only light. That year, spring arrived slowly. The cautious pinks and whites that peeped through the gray were the late blooms of the trees outside my window. It seemed fitting in some way, as if the earth had learned to be patient with itself. I got out of bed early one Sunday morning, the type of early that comes naturally and isn't planned. The sun had just risen. The floorboards were covered in a gentle gold. Like I always did, I boiled some water for tea and kept the place quiet. After that, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. At the foot of my bed, I opened the ancient cedar trunk. I had hidden things inside because I wasn't prepared to feel what they held, not because I was resentful. My mom's gardening gloves still covered in dirt. A roll of pale blue linen with tiny embroidered stars that she never used. There was also a letter nestled in the corner, beautifully wrapped like a pressed flower. Not from her. From me. The week I turned 27, I wrote it. Now I remembered. I felt worn out, overburdened, and uncertain about my role in the world. In a silent gesture of optimism, I had written to my future self. I opened it up. I hope that if you are reading this, you haven't given up on the things that nobody praises. I hope you're still doing manual labor. I hope you have a space that is uniquely yours, and don't worry if you don't. You start over every time, don't you? I grinned. I went to the old house later that day, not our childhood home, the office, renovated into a 3-unit rental. It had long since been sold. I watched from the other side of the street while drinking tea from a travel mug. The swing had vanished. They had painted over the porch. However, the tree that Mom had planted the year Madeline was born was still standing. Now stronger. Smarter. I felt the breeze flow through me while I briefly closed my eyes. A young girl laughed not far away. I pivoted. She was running across the grass after a paper airplane. Her father stood close by grinning and softly crossing his arms. That image became ingrained in me for some reason, similar to the last brushstroke on a work that I was unaware was incomplete. I didn't require a cutting of the ribbon or a headline. My father didn't have to see me. My sister didn't have to apologize to me. I had created something tangible. And retaliation has nothing to do with it. It was always about coming back to myself, not about surpassing others. Now, I follow a routine. I take my tea to a peaceful park seat beneath a willow tree adjacent to the Mira House studio every Thursday afternoon, after closing the office early. The staff knows not to schedule meetings at that time. I set out a short, uncomplicated hour for myself. I occasionally bring a book, occasionally a sketchbook. But I just sit most of the time, allowing the sun to fall on my knees, hearing the birds, observing the changes of light through the foliage. It isn't noisy. It isn't well known. However, it belongs to me. Additionally, that is more than sufficient.